The San Antonio Spurs have emerged as one of the more interesting teams ahead of the NBA trade deadline. Now, we know where they stand as a team, bottom feeders of the NBA at this current moment, with a bright future painted around rookie superstar Victor Wembanyama. They've taken an interesting approach to his development of late, kind of limiting his minutes and making sure he's getting the most bang for his buck in terms of production. They're seeing a different version of Wembanyama through the past couple weeks, hungrier on the court, more direct in the way he plays, and an overall just more energized player. But it seems like they have some interest in shaking things up ahead of the trade deadline. So I want to talk about how that could pertain to the Philadelphia 76ers and how they have a chance to catch some shrapnel from trades, which could work out in the team's favor. So I'm going to begin by kicking things off with this Chris Haynes report here, who reported that the Spurs apparently have been on the trade phones a bit when it comes to shooters Cedi Osman and Doug McDermott, something that Hayes said, quote, surprised him. And then he emphasizes that I was told the Spurs are listening to offers for some of their veterans that are on expiring deals. They don't have too many veterans, but they have two veterans that are on expiring deals, Doug McDermott and Cedi Osman. These are two players that would be pretty good fixtures on a team that's trying to win or to contend right now. So for starters, I kind of agree with Hayes' sentiment that it's surprising to see them shopping these types of players. That I think one of the keys for building a successful infrastructure for a young player like Victor Wembanyama is having the right veterans around to learn the ropes of the professional world, to learn how to handle yourself, and overall just raise his ceiling as a player, to understand how to model, to give him opportunities for success. I think we've seen some examples over time of the downfalls when there is not the right concrete steps. The Charlotte Hornets are an example of an organization where I kind of point to toward that direction, and I don't think they have done a nice enough job building the infrastructure for young players to succeed. But I do want to touch on each of these players directly and talk about how it pertains to the Sixers and why it really does make sense in my mind for players these Sixers could be targeting. So I'm going to begin by this article by the Sixers Sense here to read a report on Cedi Osman as a potential target, and it is written that, quote, one veteran they are already believed to be shopping is Cedi Osman, who came over to the Spurs last summer via trade. Also on an expiring deal, he is unlikely to be in their long-term plans despite being solid in his limited minutes for the Greg Popovich-led squad. Osman's numbers are down in a large part due to the decline in court time, but the former Cavalier has remained rock solid as a second-unit forward. His defense hasn't looked great next to a Spurs team in want of a major point-preventing acumen, but that should improve with a team that is looking to actually win games. He's still a great connector on offense, hits open shots at a respectable clip, and is still savvy at attacking closeouts to either score and find other players at the seams. He should be a good fit with the 76ers as some sort of Nicholas Batum replica. He's not quite as lengthy, experienced, or efficient, but his play style is uncannily similar to the Frenchman. With Robert Covington and Marcus Morris Sr. being up and down so far, Cedi Osman should be a cheap depth piece who can give Nick Nurse a well-rounded forward off the bench. So a lot of great thoughts here, and I want to begin by saying I don't think Osman is nearly as good as Nico Batum. Nico Batum has been absolutely terrific for the Sixers team, and I've gone as far as being on record that when you make the list of untouchables for the Sixers team ahead of the trade deadline, I would go Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and Nicholas Batum. That is how highly I think of his value to this team, more specifically from a skill set standpoint, the quick release that he has, the connective passer that he is, and overall just the veteran savvy that is important to this team. Now, I do think Osman replicates a lot of those traits, not quite to the extent, and it is a guy that I do think they're interested. But I would be lying if I didn't say that Doug McDermott is the piece that I am more interested from the Sixers' perspective. I very much believe this team needs a volume shooter, a guy that is willing and able to light it up from deep and in a hurry, and that is every bit of Doug McDermott. So to dive into a little bit of the stats this season for each of these players, as the article mentioned, they both have seen fewer opportunities than has traditionally been the case for their career. Osman averaging 18.2 minutes per game with just one start on the season, and Doug McDermott coming off the bench in all 35 of his games, averaging just 15.6 minutes per game. Now, in those levels of production, there's still some things that can be worth noting. That Osman averaging 7.5 points per game, 2.6 rebounds, and 1.8 assists per game. Those are pretty good numbers for a guy in limited minutes, still shooting 36.9% from 3 on 3.3 attempts. And as I mentioned, Doug McDermott, an absolute gunner, 45.8% from 3 he is shooting on the season on 3.7 attempts, which is really impressive stuff in his 15.6 minutes per game. And then overall 6.2 points, 1.3 assists, and 1.0 rebound. So we've seen better versions of these players in better opportunities on other teams. For Osman, I think about his opportunities being a valuable playoff contributor for those Cavalier teams. Been a couple years now, but we still understand that is the player and still not that old at this point in his career. He has a couple seasons left in him. And another point that I wanted to tie into all of this was the interest in Dejounte Murray. Now, at this point, ahead of the trade deadline, we've seen some big pieces fall in the trade market. We've seen the OG Anunoby trade to the Knicks. We've seen the Pascal Siakam trade to the Pacers. And it feels like Dejounte Murray is the next piece to fall, the most significant all-star likely to be moved ahead of this trade deadline. Now, the Spurs are a team that are showing interest. And as this is reported here, it says, quote, earlier this week, after multiple reports that the Spurs were among the teams inquiring about Murray's availability in a trade, TNT's Dennis Scott told reporters that Murray told him, quote, Pop is like a father to me. I would welcome it, but right now I'm a Hawk. Few believe he'll be a Hawk for long, though. So strange that, first off, I think it's weird that they're interested in bringing Dejounte Murray back in, that we obviously know he began his career there, had some success, and was productive for that time. It is obvious that the wheels are falling off in Atlanta, and I don't think he's destined to play the foreseeable future for his career there, but it would be a strange step for this Spurs team. Obviously, a vastly different situation bringing Murray to this team when you have a player the caliber of Victor Wembanyama to pair him with. I do see the appeal on that end, but I guess that speaks to what the Spurs do think of Murray. Now, the reason I want to tie this into this whole conversation is this feels like a very Daryl Morey move. That we had a report last week specifically on the Sixers stance that says, quote, the Sixers have been linked to Murray, but would Daryl Morey give up multiple picks for a guard who's a questionable fit next to Tyrese Maxey, his franchise cornerstone, alongside Joel Embiid? Rival executives who spoke with Hoops Hype expect Morey to continue gauging the trade market throughout the deadline. So with that report there, what that means to me is not a question of if the Sixers can get Dejounte Murray. I think they have the assets and are capable and able to get him, but it is a question if you see him as the long-term fit. Now, I do push back on that report that I do believe Murray and Maxey could fit quite well next to each other, that I like the idea of pairing Maxey with a larger guard with a longer wingspan, more defensive capabilities, even though he has not been quite that guy in Atlanta, but I still understand the logic here, and I think it could all connect of Daryl Morey taking the mindset of let me get in the mix here, try and make this a 3-team deal, and catch these scraps from both teams to help link Dejounte Murray to head down to San Antonio, to help the Hawks get the draft capital and future pieces that they want, and Daryl Morey collecting some win-now assets for this Sixers team. And two of the likely candidates in that would be Doug McDermott and Cedi Osman. Now, to see that happen, I would say would be a little underwhelming from the Sixers standpoint, that I don't love the concept of settling for just these rotation pieces. I think the Sixers are still in need of a creator in a way that neither of these guys check the boxes. So I would be unhappy if that was the one and done deal for the Sixers, but there's a lot of excellent points that can be made. And when you talk about trying to make this work and trying new pieces, there's still a crucial part of ironing down the Sixers rotation. That while the top end is pretty appealing when you talk about the starting lineup with guys like Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, Nico Batum, Tobias Harris, and then whether it's DeAnthony Melton or Kelly Oubre for that sixth spot, that's a nice top six right there. And then looking beyond that, there are some notable rotation players that we have not seen enough for Robert Covington yet. Patrick Beverley has really cemented himself as a key part of the Sixers team. B-Ball Paul, you can feel how you feel about the backup center spot, but between Paul Reed and Mo Bamba, that's still a better option than they've had in years past for this team. And even a guy like Marcus Morris who's impressed. So that right there is 10 players in the Sixers rotation. You have to believe that Doug McDermott and Cedi Osman are upgrades over some of those players at least to go out and attack this. That I don't see the appeal in approaching this type of trade if you don't strongly feel these guys are in your playoff rotation. I will say once again that I'm not as high on Cedi Osman in this conversation, but I do think Doug McDermott is a guy that can absolutely light it up from beyond, and that caliber of shooter, that type of off-ball mover, when you think of the J.J. Redicks, the Seth Curry, the gunners that the Sixers have had, playoff Joel Embiid, that would be a perfect spot for him. And he obviously comes with his defensive deficiencies as well. Neither of these guys are perfect players, but if Daryl Morey wants to do something at the deadline, and he absolutely should, I think it would be organizational malpractice to absolutely stand still at this point in time, even though the Sixers have been far exceeding expectations and better than most expected. This is a deal that I think is one of the more logical deals from Daryl Morey's perspective. This is not something I'm pounding the table, getting excited about, saying this is the missing piece for the championship, but I do want to note that I think this is something to keep an eye on as talks heat up. That I do expect the Sixers to be very much involved into the Dejounte Murray sweepstakes, but I'm honestly starting to grasp my mindset that maybe they're going to be more interested in catching the shrapnel and pieces around the edges of that deal. So I do want to hear from you guys what you think about that overall. As I've kind of laid out my feelings here, this isn't something I'm overly excited about, but I do understand the logic of, and frankly, when connecting the dots, reading the tea leaves, something that I think is more likely than not to happen if these are trades that do go down. That if Dejounte Murray does end up in San Antonio, would not surprise me whatsoever if the Sixers are the third team in the mix, helping to organize and facilitate that whole deal. So once again, thank you guys so much for tuning in this video. Make sure to smash that subscribe button right here on Sixers Digest. Drop a like on the video and let me know your thoughts on the comments. I want to know what you think about these particular two options, or if you, like me, think the Sixers should be seeking a bigger fish in the pond. Talk to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.